Welcome everybody to our talk tonight, which is entitled Learn the 4 Factors to Achieve Optimal Sleep. My name is Barton Jennings and I'm going to be presenting tonight with Dr. Tim Chung. First of all, we should consider, well, why is it that we're doing this talk? And apart from being sleep specialists and wanting to spread information about sleep to help people with their sleep, what we really inspired to do is to inspire as many people as possible to improve their health and their overall lifestyle with specialist attention to their treatment of their lung disorders and sleep disorders. But to improve overall health, it's really important to take into account these 4 factors, I think, or the 4 sort of real important pillars of health. And they are exercise, sleep, nutrition, and mental health. And I think that these 4 things really interplay with each other so closely that you can't really have optimal overall health without addressing these 4 things. So tonight we're going to be concentrating on sleep, which is one of the most important aspects. You probably would have heard of this. People say, sleep is a sign of weakness. You may have heard people say, you can sleep when you're dead, to suggest that maybe it's a waste of time spending time asleep, where if you didn't spend so much time asleep, like Kramer in Seinfeld felt, you could achieve more during the day or have more time awake to achieve more. However, it's not the case, because a lack of sleep increases mortality. And so what more do we need to know than to know the importance of sleep? Interestingly, there's a global experiment on 1.6 billion people over 70 countries conducted twice a year. And that's daylight saving. And the interesting thing about daylight saving is that when we move into daylight saving in spring, so we lose an hour of sleep, there is consistently a 24% increase in heart attack. And when we move out of daylight saving and gain an extra hour of sleep in autumn, there is actually a 21% reduction in heart attack. This is also true for an increase in road accidents, an increase in poor mood, and an increase in suicide rates at that time when we lose sleep going into daylight saving. Sleep also has a strong effect on our immune system, and having poor sleep can increase our risk of breast cancer, bowel cancer, and also prostate cancer. It also increases the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So sleep is not a luxury, it is a biological necessity. So if that's the case, then what is normal sleep? And so we can define sleep in different ways. And we can talk about the quantity of sleep being the duration, or we can talk about the quality of sleep, or we talk about the sleep architecture, which is the proportion of non-REM to REM sleep and whether you wake up much throughout the night and the quality of sleep while you are asleep. We should ideally have a short sleep latency, which means falling asleep within 20 minutes of trying to go to sleep. We should be able to maintain sleep. So once we go to sleep, we shouldn't wake up much throughout the night. And if we do, we should be able to return back to sleep quite quickly. Our breathing should remain stable while we're asleep. And we should feel refreshed when we wake up in the morning, and we should not be sleepy during the day. So we should not need to sleep or have a nap during the day. So the question is obviously, well, how do we do this? And that's what we're going to be talking about. And so we have this approach to patients with problems with their sleep, which is essentially going through these 4 factors. The first one is to make sure that we have good sleep quality. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Tim's then going to talk about alignment of body clock and the way that your body clock can upset the way that you sleep, and also talk about optimizing your mental health, because issues with mental health, feeling anxious or depressed, can certainly impact your sleep, but it can also go the other way as well. And once we've got those 3 things sorted out, then it's about cultivating good sleeping habits. So the first thing to think about is sleep quality, because if the quality of your sleep is suboptimal, it doesn't really matter what you do, you're not going to sleep very well and you're not going to get the benefit from that sleep that you should get. And so we assess that through doing a sleep study. And I know some of you here tonight have had sleep studies, and so this is an example of a sleep study, and this is an example of the data that we get from the sleep study, from all of those leads and monitors that we place on you, what that tells us. And so across the top line there is the ECG, tells us about the cardiac rhythm. That's the EMG, or the muscle tone, so we can tell whether the muscles are tense or relaxed. These squiggly lines here are all brain waves, and it tells us whether you're awake, whether you're asleep, and if you're asleep, what stage of sleep you're in. This is your oxygen levels. So it tells us whether the oxygen levels are dropping throughout the night due to the breathing. This is airflow in and out through the nose. So you can see here it's just a constant, nice sinusoidal wave of airflow. Also movements of the thorax and movements of the abdomen. There's also a nice continuous wave, which is as it should be. This is monitoring snoring. This one is monitoring our leg movement. So sometimes we kick our legs around during sleep and we can monitor those. And so this is an example of somebody with obstructive sleep apnea. And so here in the flow diagram, you can see that flow starts off normal, then where it's highlighted in aqua, it slows down and then it increases significantly. So what's happening at that time is that somebody's upper airway, which is normally held open by muscle during the day, so he can breathe in and out through an open airway, is becoming relaxed and floppy and obstructing the airway and causing a reduction in breathing. And then the person wakes up, opens up their airway and breathes up again, falls back to sleep. And you can see as you look across that panel, it's happening continuously. The oxygen levels drop every time the breathing slows down, and there's also a little bit of snoring there. This is what you might be used to seeing the sleep study report. So we can see that there is on a timeline from 9 o'clock through till the morning. The different colors are different stages of sleep. We can see arousals, so how many times people wake up from sleep. This is the position that people are sleeping in. So we know, because sometimes sleep apnea is worse when you're lying on your back. These are oxygen levels, which is a relatively nice flat line, which is quite normal. And here we mark things in here when the breathing slows down or stops. And there's a couple of marks here, but relatively normal, giving us a total AHI, which is the number of times that the breathing slows down or stops every hour. And here it's less than 2, and so less than 5 is considered normal. So this is relatively, pretty normal sleep study. This, on the other hand, we can see immediately in the hypnogram, which shows us the stages of sleep, we can see that there's a lot of yellow. And yellow is stage 1 sleep, and stage 1 sleep is very light sleep. So you can tell just from looking at that this person's waking and sleeping a lot, because every time they wake up, they go back into stage 1 or yellow sleep before they fall asleep again. There's continuous arousals throughout the night. Oxygen levels are dropping very low. And along this line, you can see those marks are all obstructive apneas. So that person's airway is completely obstructing, then they're waking up, opening up their airway, then it's obstructing again, and it's happening continuously to the point where on the summary page, we get a total AHI of 95. And so that's pretty extreme, severe sleep apnea. And you can imagine that if this is your sleep and your sleep was getting interrupted that frequently by waking up due to the upper airway blocking, then that would cause poor quality sleep and sleepiness during the day. So there are other things that can affect our quality of sleep, but sleep apnea is the main one, and the main clue to it is snoring. So if people do snore, or if they get sleepy during the day, then really the first step is to do a sleep study to investigate for that. But sometimes people also can have problems with restless leg syndrome, bruxism, which is grinding of the teeth, sometimes pain, getting up to go to the toilet can cause people to wake up a lot through the night, other medical illnesses, and sometimes medications. And so we do sleep studies both in hospital, at multiple different hospitals around Melbourne and in Gippsland. We also do home-based studies through our rooms and also in Gippsland. And here's me in the front of our rooms having a home-based sleep study all wired up with all of the monitors. So you can see it all just attaches to a little monitor that records all of the information, and those things are just placed on the skin. The next thing to consider is disorders of the body clock and also mental health. And I am going to hand over to Tim to talk to you about those now. And we can continue on with talking about a circadian rhythm.
Okay, thank you, Barton. And hello, everybody. I do see some familiar names and faces, so it's really great to see you here. I'll be talking about the circadian rhythm and mental health and the link with sleep. So just start off by posing a more sort of fundamental question. Why do we sleep? Do we need sleep? We know that animals sleep and they also dream, we can tell, because we can do those same sleep studies that Dr. Jennings showed you on pets and animals. And we can see that they go into the different phases of sleep, including REM sleep, which is typically associated with dreams. Some animals can be asleep and awake at the same time, and I'll give some brownie points to anyone who can name an animal that can do that. And if you answered dolphin, you'd be correct. I'd also accept fur seal and sea lions. And the reason it's thought that they can do that is so that they can hold their breath underwater and not drown whilst they sleep. Also so that they can look out for predators whilst they're sleeping. So it's said that dolphins literally sleep with one eye open. Perhaps approaching the question of why we need sleep, approaching it a different way is asking what happens if we don't sleep. And probably from personal experience, we know that we don't function well. We feel groggy, cognition is good. You might have heard it said that sleep deprivation can impair your cognition the same amount as being drunk or intoxicated. And if we fact check that, we found that to be true. A group of researchers at the University of New South Wales actually performed some memory and cognitive and vigilance testing on some 40-odd healthy volunteers. They did these tests at baseline, and then they kept them awake for 28 hours and kept testing them, gave them a bit of a rest, and then gave them their favorite spirits to drink to achieve a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1%, and then did these tests again. And what they found was that after about 18 hours of sleep deprivation, the results of those tests fell as much as if you had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05. So that's the same as the legal limit for driving. And after 24 hours, those same test results was the same as if you had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1%. So Dr. Jennings talked about how sleep was a biologic necessity, or is a biologic necessity, and it's a very complex process. And there's different theories about why sleep is needed, but we've done research into different things which occur during sleep. Some processes affect the brain, the clearance of a protein called beta amyloid, which has been implicated in the development of Alzheimer's disease. We know that that is cleared during sleep. Hormones are secreted, which are important in muscle and tissue growth and repair. REM sleep is important for consolidation of memories, especially in children. It helps with their neural development. And in animals, it's thought that it helps conserve energy and avoids activity which might expose them to predators. Now, how much sleep is needed? It varies depending on age. Of course, being young and needing more neurodevelopment, the sleep need increases and it gradually reduces. But for the average adult, it's thought that the ideal range is between 7 and 9 hours, although it is quite variable from person to person. Now I'd like to introduce you to the concept of biological rhythms. And these are sort of rhythms that regulate our activity, and it's observed in many life forms, even down to the single cell organisms. There's circadian rhythms, which occur about once a year. They're observed in animals, which hibernate or migrate from place to place, or even continent to continent, like birds. Infradian rhythms, which occur less frequently than a day, such as the roughly 28-day menstrual cycle. And then the main focus of the talk is the circadian rhythm, which occurs roughly about 24 hours. That's important in hormone secretion and also our sleep-wake cycle. Finally, there's the ultradian rhythms, which occur more frequently than once a day. And an example of that would be the non-REM and REM sleep cycles, which occur roughly about 90 minutes per night. So here is sort of the circadian rhythm depicted in a clock diagram, and this is a 24-hour clock with some of the main points along the cycle which are important. The main hormone which is involved in the circadian rhythm is melatonin, but there's others as well, such as cortisol and testosterone, and that sort of dictates when we function best in terms of our vigilance, alertness, reaction time, but also when we feel naturally most rested and ready for sleep. An important point along that cycle is our lowest body temperature, and I'll go more into detail about that later, but I just want to point that out. It's about 4:30 roughly in the morning. So but the circadian rhythm basically is our internal body clock that modulates many bodily functions, and it keeps on ticking, whether we are isolated and even if you're underground in a bunker, we'll continue to have that body clock going internally. You'll feel that urge to want to sleep at a certain time and wake up at a certain time. And it actually naturally runs a little bit longer than 24 hours and requires a daily adjustment by certain stimuli, which helps to lock in the circadian rhythm. And that main stimulus is bright light. So what that does is it stimulates those photoreceptors in our eyes, which sends a signal over to the circadian pacemaker in the brain, which turns off that main hormone, melatonin, which really sort of resets that body clock and locks it in to a certain rhythm. Having extreme sort of light exposure at certain times can help to shift our body clock forward or back. And the point where that change occurs is that lowest body temperature along that circadian cycle. If you expose bright lights before that time of the lowest body temperature, it helps delays or push back the sleep phase. But conversely, if you expose the light after that time, then it advances or brings forward your sleep phase. But the circadian rhythm isn't the only thing which sort of affects or drives our sleep. There's also the concept of sleep pressure as well. And that's also called the sleep debt. So the longer we stay awake, the more we build to that sleep debt. And if we go to sleep, it takes away a bit from the sleep pressure or debt. The ideal time to go to sleep is when your sleep pressure is at its maximum at this point. So you haven't slept all the way until the 9 p.m. you're most tired. And also when our body clock is at the sort of lowest circadian alertness, meaning that you get that pulse of melatonin secretion around about 9 o'clock. You can imagine if you had a nap around 3 p.m., then you'd take away from some of that sleep pressure and it'd make it a little bit harder to get to sleep at a bedtime of 9 p.m. So just with any sort of body system, things can go wrong with the circadian cycle as well. Usually that results in a mismatch between the time that we want to go to sleep and what our body clock is doing. So if a sleep-wake phase is delayed or advanced, that's a bit of a problem. In some people, there's a complete breakdown of the circadian cycle, and that's called an irregular sleep-wake phase disorder. I mentioned before that our cycle is circadian cycle is naturally a bit longer than 24 hours. So in people with vision impairment or blindness, they can be affected by a non-24-hour sleep-wake rhythm, meaning that they don't have that light reflex to help lock in their circadian rhythm. Shift work sleep disorder and jet lag are pretty self-explanatory, but also affects many people as well. So this is just illustrating a little bit about the advanced and delayed sleep phase relative to our what's considered normal, and that's more dictated by, I guess, lifestyle factors and the night and day kind of cycle. You can see what happens when it's shifted forward or back. It can sometimes cause problems. But how can we tell what circadian phase we're in? From the most low-tech, but also very useful method is to ask you to keep a sleep diary for us. So each morning we might ask you to just jot down what time you think you went to bed, what time you woke up, what activities you were doing before, whether you had any coffee or caffeine. Things like that can be useful to help establish a pattern. Actigraphy is basically a fancy Fitbit, watch, or some other device that you wear to help to determine the body movements, and can quite very accurately give us an idea of when you're asleep, when you're awake. And some more sophisticated devices can also give the amount and even frequency of light you've been exposed to. Then there's special tests, which are quite rarely used and sort of more for research purposes. We can actually test the amount of melatonin that's in your saliva, and that correlates quite well with where your circadian phase is. That's called a DLMO test. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit more about delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. That's when your circadian phase has been pushed back, because this is a very common one. So it's defined more formally as a delay in your phase of sleep relative to what your desired or required sleep time and wake-up times are. That means that your body clock has been delayed relative to what is normal. It's more common in people who consider themselves a night person, because you're normally going to sleep a lot later. There are some solutions. You can just go to sleep at your usual desired sleep time, or when you're naturally wanting to go to sleep, and then waking up when you naturally want to wake up. And that can suit some people, but it can be difficult if you have work or life commitments. So there are ways to adjust your sleep to suit your life by something called chronotherapy. That's a way to gradually reset your body clock. You start off by setting your alarm at your natural wake-up time, and then going to sleep at your natural sort of bedtime as well. Every 4 days, you bring that time 30 minutes earlier, and any more, and it sort of upsets that body clock. So that has to be done slowly. That has to be usually done in combination with bright light exposure first thing in the morning. And by bright light, we mean, really bright light, so daylight, and continuously for about 40 minutes. To be really effective, there are devices such as light therapy goggles, which has been tuned to give the correct or most effective frequency of light to really stimulate the bright light reflex. Giving melatonin at specific times can also be quite effective in shifting the body clock. It should be mentioned that sleeping pills, whether over-the-counter or prescriptions, while they can help you get to sleep, don't actually change your sleep phase. There are many shift workers, and especially in the healthcare and mining industries, these sort of workers tend to work both day and night shifts. And when even working night shift means on average losing about 25% of your sleep compared to someone who doesn't work night shift. About 10 to 15% of shift workers can experience something called shift work sleep disorder, where they have trouble getting to sleep, or excessive sleepiness accompanied by that reduced sleep. Of course, that can have huge impact on their work. It can put them at higher risk of impaired decision-making, reduce their reaction times, and puts them at higher risk of road accidents, especially after a night shift. That's a huge danger period. So here's my few top tips for a good night's sleep. Number one is to listen to your body. Go to sleep when you naturally feel sleepy. And another telltale sign is if you feel sort of sleepy in say, your lounge room or sitting on a sofa, and then you go to bed, one question to ask yourself is, do you still feel sleepy once you're in bed? If the answer is yes, then that's all fine and good. But if the answer is no, but you're sleepy before, probably you don't have a circadian problem. That might be more insomnia. With a circadian phase problem, you don't have any urge to sleep at all at the time that you want to go to bed. And another important thing is to not spend too much time in bed, because that can be counterproductive. The bedroom should only be used for sleep. Intimate activities are okay, but what you want to do is establish a psychological link that your bedroom's just for bed. Shouldn't be anything stressful or anything else happening in there that can impact your ability to sleep. So the circadian clock, yes, we can shift that even if it has moved out of phase, but it can sometimes make you feel a little bit worse before you get better, and it's best done under some guidance. So to speak to your GP if you suspect that, for a referral to a sleep physician. All right, now I'd like to move on to talking about sleep and mental health. We know that sleep has a huge impacts on physical, behavioral, and performance, but also mental health as well. Because the biggest thing that we're going to encounter is not getting enough sleep. We've looked into sleep health awareness and know that about 4 in 5 long-term poor sleepers suffer from low mood. There's a vicious cycle that occurs. Poor sleep leads to more stress, that leads to anxiety and more poor sleep. It can affect relationships and in mental health in general, the impact can be quite severe. Concerningly, research also shows that there's increasing sleep disturbance also leads to higher risk of developing neurodegenerative disease. I talked about earlier beta amyloid being cleared with our sleep, and sleep disturbance may impact that process. So having a sleep disorder can impact people with pre-existing mental health conditions, such as if you have sleep apnea, it's associated with reduced performance and memory. And we know from studies that treatment of sleep apnea, such as with a CPAP mask, which is one form of treatment for sleep apnea, can actually improve your wakefulness during the day, but also can improve people's depression. In some studies showing that the effect on depression is even higher than protecting you from heart disease. Insomnia itself may occur in many mental health conditions, and cognitive behavioral therapy is an important form of treatment for both many mental health conditions, but also insomnia. Narcolepsy, which is I guess a neurological condition where people have trouble staying awake. It can be very, very debilitating, and people with narcolepsy are much higher risk for mental health issues such as depression. Then again, sleep problems can be a feature of mental health disorders in themselves. People with depression have increased sleep disruption, and especially so if it's combined with bipolar disorder. That having poor sleep disrupts the serotonin function, which can make depression harder to treat. People with obsessive compulsive disorder have a shorter sleep duration, and that increases the risk of putting the circadian rhythm out of balance, and that can lead to one of those mismatches we talked about in the first half. Seasonal affective disorder can lead to excessive sleepiness during the day. That's a key symptom, and treating that with light therapy, same as shifting your body clock, can be very effective with treatment of that. Post-traumatic stress disorder is very commonly also associated with sleep disturbance, and can be associated with very severe, debilitating nightmares. Fortunately, there are medical treatments for the nightmare disorder in itself as well. All right, so I'd just like to end on this. Sometimes I get asked by my patients about their dreams and whether they have any specific meaning. And, we know that our psychiatry colleagues sometimes place a lot of emphasis on that. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung were sort of the pioneers of interpretation of dreams, but to a sleep physician, it's all REM. So I put, that's actually quite fitting, because apparently Michael Stipe actually said in an interview that his inspiration for writing that song, It's the End of the World as We Know It, was actually from recurrent dreams about the world ending. So if you're otherwise well, but just have some, dreams which are a bit odd, maybe it's your inspiration to write an award-winning rock song. All right, that's all from me for now. Back to you in the studio,
Excellent.
Barton.
Thank you, Tim. That was excellent. I probably should have started with an REM song. So I'm going to just continue on quickly and just cover the last bit, which is just about our sleeping habits, because once we have ensured that there's no underlying sleep disorder, which means that the quality of sleep that we're achieving is good quality sleep. So when we are asleep, the sleep is good quality. If our circadian rhythm is aligned, so we're allowing our body to sleep when our body wants to sleep according to its body clock, and we've made sure that we're doing the best to control our mental health and optimize our mental health. If we're still having trouble with sleep, then it comes down to really trying to cultivate good sleeping habits and avoid bad sleeping habits. So there are 6 good sleeping habits that I like to talk about. First one is maintaining a regular sleeping pattern. So it's really important to try and go to bed at the same time, fall asleep at the same time, and get up at the same time. And the more variability we have within those times, the more it can affect our sleep. And some people can deal with that variability, but others can't. And certainly if you're having trouble sleeping, trying to limit the variability as much as possible is very good. It's good for our circadian rhythm, as Tim was talking about. We need to have a bedtime routine, so a period of wind down. So it's not a good idea for me to do this talk tonight and then expect that I'm going to be able to go straight to sleep, because I'll be sort of fired up and excited and having a good time and won't be ready for sleep. So I need to then have a period of relaxation, maybe just watch some TV, read something, and wind down to prepare for sleep. Sometimes people wake up at nighttime, there's a lot of stuff on their mind, or they have difficulty getting to sleep because as soon as the lights go out, the mind starts racing. And this is really common. And often people find it useful to write things down that they need to do the next day on a bit of paper. So you can write things down and then not worry about it. Or you can write your concerns down or write your worries down and then just push it aside so you know it's there, you can deal with those things tomorrow. I think mindfulness exercises are really important and really useful. There's some really good apps that you can get on your phone for mindfulness exercises. My favorite ones are from the Resilience Project. So if you just go to the App Store and look at Resilience Project or Google that, there's some fantastic information there on mindfulness. And the other one is Headspace. Headspace is a well-known mindfulness app, and they will have a free sort of version of that you can get to help practice mindfulness exercises. And Insight Timer is another one that's really good. Light exposure in the morning is really important. It's important for your circadian rhythm, as Tim was explaining, but light in the morning turns off your melatonin, helps you prepare for the day and to help wake you up. So the best way to get your light exposure is to get outside, because the light from outside is the best, because light inside is not strong enough. But also getting outside, the thing to do is to get some exercise. So go out and go for a walk. So if you get up and go out for a walk, you get the added benefit of the exercise and you get the added benefit of the light exposure. So, and the last one is getting exercise during the day, because sometimes we might get to the end of the day and we feel completely exhausted, but we're not physically tired. If we're not physically tired, then sometimes it can be difficult to get to sleep. The bad habits, what we want to try and avoid, most importantly, probably, is the iPhone or the tablet in bed and the TV. As Tim said, we should keep bed just for sleep. So we shouldn't be in bed working. We shouldn't be in bed flicking through our emails. We shouldn't be in bed looking at bright light shone at us through a device. And we certainly shouldn't be flicking through social media, because it has all been shown to adversely affect our sleep. So it's a really good habit, actually, and a challenge that you could choose to accept, to actually leave your phone outside the bedroom when you go to sleep, because you don't need it overnight. You can leave it outside. Just leave it outside. Removes the need to grab it if you do wake up throughout the night and look at it. We need to try and avoid poor diet. So diet can certainly play a role in our sleep, and especially sugar in the evening. Because if you have sugar or high carbohydrate foods in the evening, then that puts your blood sugar up, and then that's followed by a secretion of insulin, and then that you bring your blood sugar down, and that can certainly affect your quality of sleep. So we want to try and have a level level blood glucose, and the best way to do that is to avoid sugar and avoid carbohydrates in the food. as Tim said, you do want to avoid too much time in bed, because sometimes people say, oh, I didn't sleep very well, so I just spend more time in bed. So because I didn't sleep very well, I'll just stay in bed for an extra hour or two because I don't want to get tired or don't want to get sleepy. But it's actually, it sounds intuitive, but it actually is counter-effective, because spending too much time in bed leads to fragmented sleep. So if you only need 8 hours of sleep to get through the next day without sleepiness, and if you get through that day without sleepiness, we know that you've had enough sleep. If you spent 10 hours in bed, you're always going to spend 2 hours awake. And that 2 hours might occur between 1 and 3 o'clock, or 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, or sometime that when you wake up and feel frustrated for waking up. So sometimes it's actually about restricting the amount of time available for sleep to help consolidate that sleep. We do want to avoid daytime naps because, as Tim showed also, if you have a nap during the day, it can make it more difficult to sleep at night. We want to try and avoid watching the clock, because that can create anxiety about waking up and create anxiety about how long you've been awake for. And so the best thing to do is, if you find yourself watching the clock, is to set an alarm for when you need to get up, and then just to cover the clock up so that you're not looking at it. And you know that you're not going to sleep in because your alarm is set. And so then that can take away that stress or anxiety created by looking at the clock and worrying about being awake. And the last one is caffeine and alcohol. Caffeine affects our sleep, and we need to remember that it takes 6 hours to get rid of half the caffeine that you've just ingested. So if you have a cup of coffee at, say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to take 6 hours. 6 hours later, so at 10 o'clock in the evening, you're still going to have half the caffeine. So if you have trouble sleeping at nighttime, then you really probably want to limit caffeine. But you also probably, if you are going to have coffee, remember that it hangs around longer than you think. And so maybe it's best not to have your last coffee at, say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but maybe it needs to be midday. And alcohol certainly affects our sleep, although it puts us to sleep quickly. Sometimes it tends to cause us to wake up much more throughout the night and adversely affect our quality of sleep. So, as we sort of talked about, and in summary, the 4 factors that we think are really important to achieve optimal sleep are to firstly ensure that your sleep quality is optimal, and if there's any sign of sleep disorder such as snoring or sleepiness during the day, to have a sleep study. We need to align our body clock to make sure that we're allowing our body to sleep when it wants to sleep, getting that bright light exposure in the morning, maintaining that regular routine. We need to try and optimize our mental health. I encourage everybody to try mindfulness exercises and have a look at the Resilience Project or Headspace. And we need to really cultivate good sleeping habits. And I'm sure no matter how well we sleep and how we try hard to optimize our sleep, there's always at least 1 or 2 of those bad habits that people do that you might be able to get rid of, or maybe one of those good habits that you could adopt. And so it's worth thinking about those and thinking, well, maybe I'll choose 1 or 2 of those that I could adopt, or maybe choose 1 or 2 of those that I could reject, and see some improvements to your overall sleep.